Awesome. So, I just want to say, for all the attendees that are here right now, and even for the panelists, just thank you for taking time out of your day to learn more about this generative leadership to thrive. And, whatever questions that you may have, we have like a group of great people who have decided to be on the panel, and so I'll give you more information about them as we go forward. So, as a one of the places that I try to live is, to have a sense of having a moment of gratitude. So the things that I think about is like, I'm grateful for patience and kindness, which translate to love. I'm patient for peace and freedom and safety and partnership and resilience because, there are many people, who may not have those experiences at this point in time. Right. And so, if you can, if we could just send them some positive vibes and blessings, for their daily lives, it's just something that we need to keep in mind. So I just wanted to make sure everyone understands that and just be a bit more cognizant and aware of that moment of gratitude. And so, we use a simple code of conduct with knowledge.org, and we just want to have the same thing. We want our patience and kindness. We want safety. We want partnership. So we want to make sure that, as we're throwing questions out, that we're just caring for each other in this moment in time. And I want to give some love to the sponsors for this event, which is knowledgeshare.org and the Generative Leadership to Thrive course itself. And with that, I want to just start introducing our panel members, right? And so Nicole Rains, she's been kind enough. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. And Nicole is a disruptor in the mental health space, champion of relationship and wellness, and an igniter of coping skills. And I was so excited to get to know her, through her husband and be in her podcast. And she has reciprocated and come on my podcast. So thank you, Nicole. So she's one of our panelists, and she'll be talking about fun and joy. And Lena Lena, I always want to call her Lena, but it's really Lena. She's she's enthusiastic about expanding about how we meet, learn, and collaborate in our remote and hybrid work environment. Lena and I have had, I've had the pleasure of being on her 24-hour meetup, right? And talking about the future of work. So I'm just doing short intros because a lot of that information is available online, and basically they could give some more as they're speaking as well. And then, Adrian Terry, is 20 years in leadership experience in the airline and auto finance industries. And he's passionate about relationship between the strategy and execution and how leadership discipline sustains the flow of value in the organization. Really good stuff, that we have here today. Kemmy Raji is an enterprise coach and trainer, and we have connected through our passion for agile, our passion for education for students. So I'm really excited, that she's here today. And then Brandon Rains, I know he didn't come in as a panelist, but Brandon is an organization design and enterprise coach who has worked with public and private entities, both large and small. And I'll just promote him from being an attendee to being a panelist. So thank you, Brandon, for being here. And we have Phil Zofria, started his career as a programmer. We have spent the last several years working as co-collaborators with a client, as enterprise coaches. So I'm glad that he's here today. And then, we have Ed Utley, my homie, my buddy that we've been hanging out a lot with. And so he has been doing some really good work, in terms of as an enterprise coach and as a trainer. And you could also read his background. So I have to bring my friend Brandon Rain in. Sorry, Brandon, promote to panelists. Let's make sure that he could get on. Okay, Brandon is in. Let's see, fix. All right. Good. So, now that Brandon is here, he's also a pit master, and we love the fact that he makes some really good, yummy stuff to eat. So, look, I'm going to go ahead and set the stage, so that you could have an understanding of what generative leadership is. So I'm just going to share my screen for a second here, and you're going to have to bear with me that I'm going to use a PowerPoint slide, but that's what I have today, right? And so I'm just going to start with the conversation about just my leadership journey, right? And I'll speak to it from the context of scholarship practitioner, kind of learner context, right? So from a scholarship perspective, I have a doctorate in management and org leadership, so I've studied leadership for a very long time, published a thesis, talked to the value of Scrum to organization that's available out in ether. Lots of articles that I have published in Forbes. So I've been studying leadership for a very, very long time. And as a practitioner, founded several companies and been in different leadership roles. One of my key passions is 5 Saturdays, which is an initiative that I started to help high school students learn about leadership, learn about coding, about agile. And then also I've had several corporate leadership roles. But then also as a learner, right? I mean, I'm always in community, attend conferences, podcast, read lots of books, have lots of conversation with these beautiful, bright people that we have, present today. And then also I've written several books about leadership in different ways. The latest is Generative Leadership to Thrive. So that's kind of like my context around being engaged and involved, in leadership itself. But when I think about generative leadership and the context, so my definition of what that means is a human-centered practice focused on co-creating the conditions for people and teams to thrive. That's my definition. And when I look at some of the industry leaders and what they've been saying about it, you look at Peter Senge, who is really big into learning organizations. He is really big into systems thinking. So he's talking about, let's build learning organizations where leadership and members are participating. And then look at Margaret Whitley and look at her books. And in her book, she said, leadership and the new science, learning a century of complexity, learning in a century of complexity. So what she's talking about is self-organization, emergence, and co-creation. Right. And I think hopefully you're beginning to see a theme here. And we look at Ron Westrom and you look at some of the stuff that he has written, the topology of organizational culture. So he's talking about high performing organizations. And, Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft, when he said, when he got to Microsoft, he goes like, we just need to change the way things are. And so our people could be more engaged, empowered, and inspired teams. And then the Boston Consulting Group, they had a little thing that talks about leaders want to leave the world a better place, right? And so you can see there's a theme here about human-centered practice of really creating these awesome conditions for people and teams to thrive. That's the whole context about generative leadership. And why would we even care about this, right? And I tried to pull the lens back and say, like, let's look at the evolution of leadership. And let's look at the evolution of leadership through the different industrial revolutions that we have had, right? We've had 4 so far. And right now we're in the 4th, right? Which is, according to many industry leaders, they thought it started in about 2016. So it's been around for roughly about 8 years, according to them. And so what we get in this 4th industrial revolution is, AI, which is a big topic globally. We have machine learning, robotics, these cyber physical systems of things that we could wear. So that's one aspect of what's taken place, and that's shifting the future of way, and even the way we work today. And then we think about how many generations are actually in the workforce, right? You have baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and we all have a different way of how we want to lead or we want to be led, right? And so there's a lot of conversations around what's happening here and the need for a shift in the way we lead people. But then also we look at the VUCA context. Things have been volatile, uncertain, complex. dealing with, a lot of ambiguity in the process as well. How will we lead in this space? And one of the things that I'm saying is like, let's, the great man theory has been around forever, right? We're beginning to see a resurgence of that with a tremendous amount of authoritarianism that's happening in the world. And so I said, let's have less of that. We need less of that in this time with these different generations, the amount of complexity and certainty that we have, the different systems that we're working in. And let's amplify more of this generative leadership practice, right? Which is more human-centered and something that's really good for us. So one of the things I want to jump forward in is that we're going to, let me give you a little bit more context as well, right? When we think of generative leadership, I say that it's rooted in this habit and this practice called Ubuntu, right? And so when I think of Ubuntu, I think of it as that I see you, I value you, I welcome you. That's the context that I see you, the way Ubuntu is defined, because it says, I am because you are, I am because we are. So it gives us a sense of belonging as a practice. So when I think of Ubuntu, this is how I translate it, that I see you, I value you, and I welcome you. Then the other aspect that I've defined to make sure that Ubuntu is something that we could really lean into as business leaders is that, that we have patience and kindness. And it's exactly what I was talking about when I started, is that we have patience and kindness, we have safety, there's some resilience, and this partnership. This is the other aspect of Ubuntu, the way that I've defined it. And the reason why all of this makes sense, right? The reason why all of this makes sense is that when we go from that big macro, from the fourth industrial revolution, the lens, and we come down to our organizations, what we're looking at is trying to navigate these three layers of leadership. And the way I think about them is that we have a foggy top, right? Trying to find clarity in the cloud, right? We have a fluid middle. Some people want to call it the messy or frozen middle. I'm saying they're trying to align strategy to execution. And then there's a flexible bottom, right? This is where you have all of the emergent leaders hanging out, the innovation teams hanging out, and they're ready to build the next generation. What generative leadership can do for an organization is that now we could have more adaptive strategies, a bit more flexibility in how we do things. We have adaptive operations, right? So all of the things we were talking about, agile and lean and these different principles, this actually applies. Gives us an opportunity to deliver value frequently and in a very positive way. And then the great benefit realization that we spend time trying to figure out. So I wanted to just give you that context as we're walking through what is generative leadership, why we need it, how many people are out there saying like, this is the way to go after COVID and in this new world order. So I'm going to stop sharing because I am going to harass my panelists, and they're, I have a series of questions for them, and they're going to enlighten us with how brilliant they are. So let me find these questions that I am going to serve up for our panel members. Good. So panel members, are you guys ready? I hope I've, set the stage for people to understand why we even care about this generative leadership to thrive practice. So I kind of set an order here, and Adrian, and let me just do this too. I'm going to throw the question in the chat as well, so that just that we have it. And so everyone could, yep. All right. So Adrian, so you could read it, you could hear me, as a leader, just describe when you witnessed the transformative power of an abundant mindset, creating this culture of generosity, collaboration, innovation. You and I talk about this, and just share a pivotal moment where you embody the generative adaptive practice of the abundance mindset. So why don't you just give us some context about that?
Yeah, so the first part of, I think, your question, describing a time when I witnessed the transformative power and abundant mindset. In a senior leadership meeting within an IT department, the issue really had to deal with dealing with the dissenting voices, right? I remember the chief leader in that space had already achieved general consensus about a course of action that needed to be taken on a very sensitive issue. And whereas most leaders might avoid getting the opinion from those who might oppose a directive like this leader sought out the dissenting voice to ensure that all sides of the issues were discussed. So you had that amazing slide with the Ubuntu principles: I belong, I see you, I value, I welcome you. This is a leader knowing that certainly he was going to make the decision based on the general consensus, but he still wanted even the dissenting voices to be heard. So I just really love that slide. I think it resonates well with that particular instance. And I just saw that the psychological safety at that level of leadership was better than what I thought before I joined that department, that team. So I was very, very impressed by that. Other senior leaders might not even swing the microphone that direction to give them time to even speak their thoughts, but that was not the case in this instance. So I'm grateful that I could be part of that. Me personally, sharing a pivotal moment when I hope I embody this thought of generative leadership. I remember having a meeting with my team about a year ago, and we were having a general conversation about the importance of relationships. Everyone here on the panel, everyone attending the session probably is aware of this, but one, you never know where you're going to have to work again with someone you're at odds with today. And two, whether you know it or not, you're always interviewing. So in both scenarios, as I told them, relationships are everything. So what I did was I encouraged the team to try an exercise. I told them to think of someone that they've had a rough discussion with lately. And maybe that relationship is not as positive as it should be. I asked them all to consider reaching out to the individual and doing something in the form of, hey, our last conversation wasn't the most constructive or positive, and I want to do what I can to help us communicate better. Can we start over and see if we can land in a better place with that issue? So the whole point of the exercise was to try to restore kind of that psychological safety between the two individuals. And think in terms, I think you had this on one of your slides, think in terms of we and not I, right? No man or woman is an island unto themselves. So my logic is that healing in individual relationships can eventually spread into the broader organization. And that was the whole intent of that exercise. They were reluctant. A few of them took me up on the offer. Others chose not to, but that's okay. That's okay.
Hey, you did your part, man. You did your part. And, Lena, thank you for being so courageous. And I'm going to throw that in the chat. You said you're going to step in for Lizzy. I think she couldn't make it today. So, Adrian, you talked about we instead of I, and the way I translate we is to be willing and enabled. And so, Lena, at the heart of generative leadership is the whole concept, really trying to empower individuals to contribute their unique talents and perspective. So share a little, about your experience and your context with, that idea of like focus on we, willing and enabled.
So I could see on the agenda that Lizzy wasn't here, so I just kind of jumped in, so it wasn't really what I prepared for, but I'm happy to jump in, also because I think that we, for the work that I do, is typically where I always, I feel very excited and very passionate. I think the we is what shapes the culture of a team or the culture of organization. And similar to what Adrian was just sharing with his story, role modeling of invitation, or especially role modeling of the kind of language that we put out there. So as generative leaders, and that being if we are in a position where we have the title that's going to show the organizations that we're leaders, or because we're just stepping into a holding space or having some sort of a leader approach within our team, if we have that title or not. I don't I think it's how we're showing up, right? But I think that the power of our language, if we're just going with we, instead of like, I think this and this, and be like, how could we go about solving this issue? What kind of things do we need to have in place? I am seeing this, but what do we need? Like simple questionings around just putting we in our language, and then also putting we in our practices. And we in our practices becomes like, what agreements do we need to have in place for us to have a psychological safe environment for us, right? Like what collaborations, agreements do we want to shape together? So where I've seen this in most powerful, and actually, Dave, you were just saying that mentioning that our overlap was through the 24-hour future of work space, where we put together a conference that ran remotely for 24 hours around the globe. And those circle teams were very much enhanced by this, like, we are enabling you to run with what's relevant for you as a team. You have this amount of time through the event that you're going to shape. And then we just, with coaches, empowered that team to do that, but on no other strings attached to what that was going to look like. So coaching, supporting that sense of we through language and space to actually move forward with those actions.
You know, that is so excellent. The way you brought that forward. So, you know, that kind of like just brings us into the other conversation with Kemmy, Raji, right? And, you know, when we focus on we, we're also talking about win and lose as a team. So I'm going to drop her question also into the chat. And so, Kemmy, you know, we have had time to do a podcast. Pretty much just to let everyone know, everyone on the panel has done a podcast with me except Lena. And Lena, you and I are going to have to get together and get a podcast going about one of these subjects, okay? She's the only one who hasn't been on the podcast. But going back to Kemmy, Raji, you know, when you're talking about embracing this generative adaptive practice of win and lose as a team, we talk about shifting from individual accomplishments to the collective. So how does this experience shape your approach to, you know, team resilience and growth-oriented feedback?
Yeah, and I read that book that Dr. Dave wrote, and it's fantastic. And I did a little bit of research as well on the generative leadership, which is awesome. And I think it lends itself to coaching, which is what we kind of like try to promote within the organization. And it's not coaching to go and tell people what to do, but actually be interested in them, you know, understanding what they are doing outside of work. Not that you're intruding their private life, but we try to say we have our work life and then we have our personal life, but they kind of like overlap as well, you know. So being interested in that person, being interested in your team and how their vision, personal vision, aligns to the organization vision, it's always important. So that way, when you work together as a team, you know that person is happy within the team and within the organization. And whatever they are also experiencing when it comes to the negative side of things, you're also involved in it. So winning and losing as a team together is having a common goal. Aside of what the corporation goal is. So you've been asked to be on a project, great. What are your aspirations as well as you work on this project? It's very important for leaders to know so that when people ask for more work or ask for more interesting things that they could do, it means that they are fulfilling the corporate goals, the strategic goals, as well as fulfilling their own personal goal. I remember us when I worked on a project some years ago. It was a federal government job, and we were trying Agile out in so much trying out that the government wasn't interested in Agile, but this organization were very keen. So it was their first project Agile as well. And they wanted to turn it into a project, not a project, but a product, which they could sell out. And so as they try to navigate that, there was a lot of pressure on the team. There was a lot of pressure from the government work. So we had to kind of like balance expectations. But at some point it didn't work because when the time come to deliver, they weren't ready. So it was so demotivating for the teams that were working on it. But the leaders were so great as well, because every week they will bring everybody to one room and say, what is going on? What are you struggling with? What are we struggling with? And how can we move forward? So they were listening every week constantly to the team and getting feedback. And based off that, we not only were successful in delivering the core part of that project, they also took on some of the other provinces work as they were doing it, because they now had something to show for. It wasn't perfect, but it was just brilliant how the leaders were very great in incorporating people's feedback and people's opinions and thoughts around that. And it made the team to work. It was stressful, but people were happy at the end of the day. Yeah.
And that's so beautiful, right? As we go from focus on we, willing and enabled, into win and lose as a team. This is another key important aspect of this generative adaptive practice that we're bringing forward, is that now we're going to talk about, we trust you to achieve our goals, right? Which is a really important aspect. And, Phil Zafria, he's going to give us some insights on that. So when we talk about emphasizing the empowering individuals to take ownership and drive results through trust and autonomy, Phil, I know you have some great experiences, of how you've helped teams and helped to co-create an environment where there is trust, and you are creating that space for people to achieve their goals. Give us some insights, about how you've done that.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. A couple stories I have. One, though, in particular, was a company where I was hired, new hire as a director of IT, and I had inherited several development teams. And the previous director had a much different leadership style. Gave directives, right? Everybody was get their orders, their marching orders, and the people really they didn't get to think for themselves, and things moved really slowly. Me coming in was a big change. We practiced all the generative leadership tenets that you were touching upon before, but maybe I should step back a little though. In this scenario, you just don't walk in the door and say, "I trust you to achieve your goals," right? You've got everything from the beginning new. And this, I think a lot of people, in establishing relationships, when you come into a new position or a new company, this is the way it works. And there's a lot of groundwork to be done, and trust needs to be achieved. And the number one thing I started with was communication, because without communication, there can't be any trust, right? And work and non-work, I think, as someone just said before, and whatever you talk about, behaviors have to back that up. And relationships are everything. A person doesn't exist in isolation. We've talked about that too. And the second thing I went into was to evaluate and discuss competency. Because if you're a leader, without competency, there can't be any trust either. So I used when I first went in, I used a particular activity or tool, and maybe I'll try to put a number of the tools and activities I've used. I'll try to put them in the chat for everybody. So I think just throwing those words out there, right? We can grab hold on and look them up. But I use this competency matrix, and basically you just list the people's, you list the skill set you need on the left, the people's names on the top, and then you have a column that says, I need this many low level, this many medium level, this many experts for this particular competency. And then you work with everybody to fill out that matrix. And this is vulnerability right from the start. because people are saying, oh yeah, I'm a low, I'm a medium, I'm an expert. So if you can get that done and everybody's communicating even on that level already, that's you know, a big win, you know, right off the bat. So I usually start there, and then we go through, obviously this is an incremental, an iterative thing, and we increase our behaviors and practice, you know, what we need to practice. In my case, eventually they could make their own decisions. And we've heard before, make decisions where the information is. And as I said, some of the activities I used was the competency matrix. I'll throw that in there. There's this thing called delegation poker, celebration grid, moving motivators, and I'm sure everybody's seen the video Greatness by David Marquet, so that's something too. But anyway, I'll throw these things out there because this is stuff as a leader that I think you can leverage. But anyway, the point came when I was able to trust my teams to get the work done, and they trusted that I would support them and had their best interests at heart. And what a noticeable increase in pace. Politics was minimized, red tape was minimized, innovation sprang up with their newfound autonomy. And one of example of that is, you know, at this time in history, that what I'm talking about was this team, this organization, I should say, had silos still, right? We had a development area, QA area, right? And on and on and on. So one of the developers actually said, we're working on this big dashboard, management dashboard project. And one of the developers actually said, hey, we need to help QA with this product. There's just too much for them to test. And I think what we were talking about before, right? You just broke down individualism, right? You know, and everybody got on board and they got together and they tested everything, you know, both the developers and the QA working together. It was just huge otherwise, which at that time in history of this company was a big win. So that was the one that I wanted to share with you, and I'll also put those activities in the chat.
So appreciative, Phil, of giving that information. You know, so as we go through the conversation as a leader, you know, and of how we're navigating, you know, the organization, right? We start off with the abundance mindset, focus on win and lose as a team. We trust you to achieve our goals. Now we're going to bring, you know, Pitmaster, you know, and he knows who I'm talking about, Brandon Rains, and we're going to say partner and have conversations to learn more. So let me go ahead and put that out there, and talks about, you know, the ability to cultivate meaningful partnership and relationships. You know, Brandon, I put his question out there, but, you know, I know he has some really beautiful stuff to say. So what say you, Mr. Pitmaster, today?
I feel like I should tell a story about making brisket now or something. I will not. That's another panel discussion. Well, gosh, first, let me just say thank you for being here with everybody and the wisdom that's been provided. I feel like I just want to build on things that have already been shared. I think as it's already been said, relationship is so important. And it took me a while to understand that, quite frankly, whether or not that was in when I was as a software developer or as I started coaching. And it was, I don't know if it was one moment, but I think it was one of those a lot of different moments where I started working with teams and figuring out, you know, I'm actually surrounded by a lot of really smart people who come into work every single day excited about what they want to do, that they have a lot of mastery in what they actually do. And what I started to see, the patterns I started to see was, you know, the relationships were kind of getting in the way, or unhealthy relationships were getting in the way. And there wasn't a lot of clarity about things. And once we started having those kind of, or I should say, once I started to realize that, and then oddly enough, I guess if there was one event, it was one of those things where, I don't know, came into my head, maybe I walked into a room and got reminded about the manifesto. And one particular line in the manifesto, when it was like the first line, basically, well, I guess it's technically the second line, but individuals and interactions. And it was one of those like, oh my God, that's not the word I actually use. I won't use the word that it is. Not nice for mixed company. But it was just one of those eureka moments. I'm like, yeah, that's it. And I think it's no accident that it is very high in the manifesto. Individuals and interactions. Yeah, that's it. Let's do that. And I think it was just a matter of just starting to have conversations with groups and saying, well, you know, and I would say I had the fortune of taking some really good professional coaching training through CTI and ORSC, and it felt like it just kind of coalesced. And just by having conversations with folks and asking them, well, you know, how do you want to work together? What's getting in your way? What do you need from each other? What can you commit to as you work together? And just those kind of questions, the reactions that I started to hear were, gosh, I never really thought about that. That's an interesting question. Let's think about that a little bit. Maybe even let's write some of that stuff down. Let's revisit that, whether or not it's in a retrospective or whenever we thought it was necessary. And I think the cool thing that I started to observe as a result of that is people started to light up. It felt like it was one of those just missing pieces. Because again, these are smart people, you know, smart, motivated people, which is always a really, really cool thing. And so I think it's made the difference for me, and it allowed me to think back of when I am on teams, or when I've been on the best teams that I've worked on. That's the kind of stuff that felt really good. That's the kind of stuff that felt like, yeah, I want to go to work today. I want to go work with these people. I want to have, you know, either professional or personal relationships with these people. And it made the day much, much better. So when stuff sucks, you know, because they will suck, it becomes just a much more enjoyable thing. That's like, I got my people around me, and, you know, we'll figure it out. We'll make it less sucky, because we've got a group of people who are there with us every single day. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. You know, thank you so much, Brandon. And I want to encourage the attendees to use the Q&A. You know, you look Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in Zoom as you're listening to each of the different panelists, and you have a question, you know, just go ahead and put in the Q&A section, and right after we're done introducing these concepts, then we'll be able to start answering, you know, your questions. I see one out there from my friend from Ewan, so I'll respond to that later. So, you know, one of the things is that as we're focusing in teams and the leadership mindset, is like we also have to do experimentation, because we're talking about innovation, right? Run the experiment, evaluate the hypothesis. And so Lena is going to take that on and talk about and share something more about, you know, the type of experimentation that she has been involved with, some of the successes and failures. So go for it, Lena.
Thank you. I'm kind of starting where Brandon started also, like, because I think I want to comment on a lot of things that's already been in this space. I'm loving how it's, even though we didn't prep together, it's almost like this panel is just like, we're just building and building and building on each other, right? Like the collaboration, the power of being in those relationships, modeling certain behaviors, inviting in for those connection pieces. That's like a red thread through all of this that we're talking about, which is really a kudo back to the whole framework, Dave, right, that you've created, that how these things are linked as we're talking about them. So I'll be happy to talk about the experimentation piece, like why is it important that we run these kind of experiments, what can be powerful, and actually the example I want to pull in is actually also how I saw it was essentially necessary for this organization to really feel that they were in it together. So that's where I think experimentations also can be really powerful, and then that's looping back to the whole, like, we win and lose as a team, and that becomes like a sense of team building in itself, right? So again, all these are connected. But when you asked me to come up with an example, what really stood out to me was some client work I did last, like in the spring, that was around supporting more fluid and productive hybrid work. So this was an organization that had before the pandemic had very much was very defined. Its culture was very defined around the physical space that we go to work and do our work in. So when the pandemic hit, they of course had to do remote work, and they did that. But as many organizations, they were able to be fairly productive doing that, but the collaboration and the interlinked was just disappearing. Like there was a lot of, I'm doing this, I'm heads down, I'm going to get my tasks done. But the sense of the team, the sense of us as an organization. So then after the pandemic, the organization's like, we're going to now do hybrid because people want that flexibility that they had during the pandemic and working remotely. But we also want to get that sense of ourselves being together in the team. Let's be better at doing hybrid. And they were not very good at it. And then I got pulled in. They're like, how can we tell us what to do? And I was like, well, we got to figure out what's going on in this organization, and there was a mandate. Now we're going hybrid, right? So the whole organization has already was pushing back. So it's like, I'm not going to be the one to go in and put other mandates on about how you're going to do this work. Like that's the last thing. So I will do the work with you if we're going to go in and do some experimentations. Let's plant some seeds. Let's figure out what these teams need and what they're ready and curious to actually explore around hybrid work. Where are their needs in terms of getting better at doing this hybrid work? What are they not willing or curious to do because they got burned through the pandemic? Do they even have a good sense of what hybrid is? A lot of them was like, we're actually equalizing hybrid with remote. It was like, no, hybrid is that when we actually have opportunities to be in person, but what's our in-person ratio? What's our rhythm of being in person, and when do we do things remotely? So what we did was started a hybrid lab where each team were exploring different things that they want to experiment with. And some of the things that came up was experimenting on what's our frequency of that in-person rhythm. As a team, how often are we going to be? Is that every Thursday? Is it 3 days a week we're in person? Like what works with us, but on team basis, not the whole organization. So they're experimenting with that. They were also experimenting with their meeting facilitation, because one of the hardest thing about hybrid is actually the hybrid meeting. It's a messy forum. So they were rotating facilitations, different people coming in and testing that forum so they could learn from each other, figuring out what works for us, different temperaments, different facilitation styles was working in that. And another thing, they were experimenting with a lot of things, but another thing I want to point out, they're experimenting with asynchronous tools, because how can we really piggyback on the hybrid when sometimes we're synchronized together, but what's the power of us actually collaborating, getting a sense of each other when we're asynchronized together? So the experimentation portion was that each team got to take apart the pieces of hybrid that was most relevant for them, mess around with them in a safe container, and then evaluate. Back to Brandon's, he was talking about retros, right? Going back and looking at what worked here, what are we not going to do ever again, what pieces do we want to rebuild on, and then as an organization, they started building a catalog of yes, what is hybrid for us? What works for us? So that's where the experimentation was very powerful.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I know it's a thing, right? That people are fighting with the hybrid model after working remote after COVID itself. And so out of that, the question that you run the experiment, you evaluate the hypothesis, is what did we learn from failure to grow? And I know Ed and I talk about a lot of these things in terms of failures and successes. And Ed, let's talk about, generative leadership. We talk about emphasizes learning from setbacks and embracing failure as an opportunity for growth. What say you about this context?
Hey, thanks, Dr. As I was thinking through this, I went back to probably my first full-time opportunity as a Scrum Master Agile coach for a company. from a friend of mine, actually, who was a CTO, CIO guy, brilliant dude. And he had introduced me to these concepts. I had spent 20 years in automotive engineering up in the Detroit area, and I was a partner in a company. And when I left there 10 plus years ago, I was real just discouraged by just corporate America, how it just used people, burned them up, and then threw them out. And I was like, man, I'm just done with corporate America. And I'm just so frustrated. Moved down here, and I bought into a partnership with some other guys. And anyways, made friendships with this friend of mine. And I was asking him some questions. How do I do some of this stuff with some of my employees and this and that? And he started telling me about this crazy Scrum Agile stuff. And so I started trying these little things at my company with employees, and had no idea at all what I was doing. And anyways, there were some real positive things that happened. I was like, that's crazy. I don't know what I'm doing. And yet the people are happy. And so not too long into that, my partners made a decision. They went in another direction, and I left that. And my friend, the CIO guy, he says, hey, so anyways, I've got this thing. I've just hired on to this company. They want me to come in. They're private equity owned. And at first I'm like, I've done private equity owned companies. I don't want to do another one. He goes, no, just listen to me. Because we had a new CEO. He's brought me in. He wants me to do this stuff to get these new technologies out there. And he says, what I really need is a Scrum Master, Agile coach to come in and do this. I said, Brian, I don't know anything about software. I come out of this world. I don't know anything about how you build software. He goes, I got really smart people to do that. I don't need you to do that. I need you to come in and help me change this place, and anyways, through a lot of conversation, I ended up going there, and it was my first time I'd really witnessed a chance to see a generative leader, and how it wasn't just talk. He really, to his depths, he believed this stuff, and he had data and facts to prove that it worked. And so he's like, we need to change the mindsets of these people. They're really beaten down. They've watched, different leadership teams just come in, basically survive until the board, tossed them out and brought in new ones. And so it was kind of like almost some public companies where they have to perform every quarter. It's just like, we're just changing people out. And he's like, we've got a short amount of time to change things. And so I jumped in and I went to him, I said, so can I run some experiments? And he's like, I want to do this thing. He goes, do it. I'm like, I know, but it could cause you problems. He goes, do it. I'd never had somebody have that kind of trust and faith in me, that I was potentially going to be doing things with their teams that could get him fired, and he just, the place he came from heart and trust and belief, he just empowered me. And it was the funnest experience, because I got to go in and just work with all these brilliant, super smart people. But they just didn't know how to work together. And so, he through our leadership team, he started giving us all kinds of books on becoming better leaders, Lencioni stuff, and just really, he was, encouraging us, continually change your resume and put it out there, and then go take interviews at other companies. And we're like, what? He goes, because not only does it help you to become better at your thing, but he goes, if I'm not doing a good job as a leader, then I don't deserve to keep you. I'm like, that's crazy talk. I'd never heard a leader talk like this, but it kind of set this example for how I led and how I worked with the teams, and going into this whole idea of how do you touch failure? And these people were afraid to get anywhere near a landmine because they'd watched what happened to other people. And so it was really fun to just start changing that mindset of, let's fail with some stuff. Let's see what works and what doesn't. And then when they could see nobody got blown up, nobody got fired or anything like that, they started pressing in and going, okay, I can try this stuff. And it just became like this innovation hub, people trying things, reaching in, leaning, challenging each other. And it was really powerful to see. It changed me from when I left there to going forward, of that. Now I just want to work with people that want to be generative leaders. When I had a chance to work with guys like Adrian, Terry, and people, Phil, and these other people, and just watch how they just breathed it with everything they did. I was like, man, that is what I want to help people do. So that gets me all excited. I'm all fired up right now. So that's it.
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful, the way you bring that. Lizzy is here. I'm going to let her in, just let everyone know. But we're going to go to Nicole Rains. And When I think of someone who, when we're talking about fun and joy, it's something that, I added to these tenets because I thought it was really important that, yeah, we trust you, we provide, co-create these environment, but what about fun and joy? That we could really begin to appreciate each other and really demonstrate that. So, Nicole, what song rocked your world today?
Blinding Lights by a local DC group known as Black Alley.
All right.
That is the song that is repeating in my head today.
That's really great. So, generative leadership, we talk about the power of fun and joy and fostering creativity, engagement, and a thriving work environment. I mean, share some experiences about that.
Sure, Dr. Dave. Thank you for having me. And just hearing how each tenant and the practices involved with them, it really is looking at how do you create a space in which joy and fun can exist. And all of the tenants that everybody else has talked about are actually creating that environment. So really looking at that linkage. So I used to work at a nonprofit, and we did intensive work based upon trauma. And so when I talk about that, people were like, oh, I can only imagine what the workplace was like. But what happened is our boss created a committee. She used to refer to me as a reluctant leader. I ended up being a co-chair on that committee because I had so much work, and so did my colleagues. But that committee was actually in charge of joy and fun. But you cannot force fun upon people. That is not fun in and of itself. So what we did is we looked at, okay, what do people want to do? We have this committee. What are our strengths? How can people show up in a really authentic and intentional way by showing their strengths? So we had people teaching cooking lessons. It was an hour each Friday. Some people did dance lessons. Some people did visualizations, which that one sounds more stereotypical to therapists. Other times we watched sitcoms. We taught people how to step, which is traditional dance. It's from African boot dance, but it's also involved in the traditionally Black Greek letter organization. So we taught people how to step and just being able to have some movement in there. We did chair yoga. So we did all these things on that designated hour, but throughout the entire workday, we had a little box that was called the I Just Want to Say box. And what that was is for people to be able to write out, they could either sign their name or be anonymous, just something that they wanted to share about a colleague or a coworker. And something as, thanks for listening to me, or you did a good job. And having that continual spirit of recognition. So what we were doing is we were infusing and creating an environment where fun and joy could exist, instead of thinking, oh, okay, well, it's a workspace, we have to be very disciplined, we have to be very serious all the time. But you need to be able to create that environment as well. And I know on the podcast, Dr. Dave, I shared a very personal professional example of working with a child who it actually was my hardest case to date as a clinician, and being able to be working on a very significant amount of complex trauma and taking a very model that's very based on steps. And how do I do that? Where is room for that? And it was listening to the client and figuring out what the client wanted, having that collaboration with this child in order to take that model that was developed by an adult therapist and turn it into a flower garden. And each flower represented a different stage in the model, and having a butterfly that was a visual representation of going through that. And I use that example because, especially when we're talking about complex trauma, people don't think, they're like, oh, well, there can't be any kind of joy there. But by collaborating and listening to the client and joining with that light that was within, we created some joy in that very dark space of being able to move through that. And just recognizing that as we, again, listen to all the tenants and put them together, that we can create this space of joy and fun where they can exist. Not that we're going to come in and say, oh, this is what we're doing for fun, and that we're going to look at and listen to our staff and to our team members and to our clients and being able to do that. And that's what each tenant has already talked about. So Dr. Dave, I feel like the framework by itself actually creates an environment where fun and joy can exist.
Man, talking about how to bring that together, huh? Talking about how to bring that together, man, that was beautiful. I know, Lizzy, you're here. I'm glad to see you. But I wanted to answer this one question from Ewan O'Leary, So let me see if I could copy. So he says, let me throw this in here. And in the chat, so he says, so I'm hearing lots of great experiences. What's the model that underpins this all? Of course, I get Ubuntu. And what else is under this? How does it fit together? So we've been talking about how this all fits together, but one slide that I didn't share, and I intentionally didn't share this slide, that I'm going to just share this with you so that we have a perspective of, the tenets and the practices that we're talking about over here. So there was eight things that came from a mixture of Ron Westrom, a mixture of Peter Senge, a mixture of different other peoples that I've read throughout the years. Like I said, I've been studying leadership for a very long time, and I've studied it at the highest level that you can. So these are the 8 tenets of how it's going to guide you. And I call them the generative adaptive practice, right? Abundance mindset. Adrian gave us insights, focus on we, which Lena stepped into, and we're going to give Lizzy a chance to talk about, we trust you to achieve our goals, which is another important conversation. Win and lose as a team, partner to learn more, run the experiment. What do we learn from failure and fun and joy? So each one of these tenets sits under this cohort course. I actually provide a way of how do you implement this, right? Because when we think of abundance mindset, what does that really mean? And I'll share that information later, but just to answer your question, Ewan, is that, this is the model that underpins generative leadership to thrive. Right. And if we could get through each one of, if we could even do one of these in an organization, as you've heard from the panelists, there could be a lot of significant progress made within the organization. So does any of the panel members have anything else that they would like to contribute as a response to Ewan's question?
Dr. Dave, if I could comment on that, if I could, real quick.
Yeah, brother, go ahead.
I love how you have each of these 8 areas here. Maybe not in this slide, maybe in some other presentations that I've seen you do. You also reflect on the head, heart, and hands.
Yeah.
And if you kind of sift through these 8, you kind of see that progression, right? These first couple are certainly in the head space, definitely in the heart as you start looking at 3 and 4, into the hands when you think about partnership and running experiments. And there's a 4th H, Dr. Dave, I don't know if you have it in any of your slides, it's called the habits. That's that last piece. So the whole point of this is to introduce and to cement some better enjoyable experiences that are long lasting. And to me, that's what I see in 7 and 8 is kind of that 4th H, which would be habits. Just some stuff I'm pulling from some leadership stuff that I'm also studying. So the whole head, heart, hands, and habits, I just see it all over this page. I thought I'd throw that out there.
Man, hey, thank you for that, because I just wrote an article for Forbes that's talking about the head, heart, and hands. And now look at this. I just learned something new. Habits. Love it. Anyone else? Love, go ahead, Ed.
I was just going to say, Dr. Dave, for me, what kind of sets up the rest of the GAP, it really starts with the abundance mindset. And it really wasn't until I met you that put that word to, I'd always had this thought in my head of how people should lead and act and as leaders and just kind of, but I never really had this word abundance. And when I think of abundance, it's such an awesome word that makes me happy. But abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset, and I always use that example now when I'm talking to leaders, is that the whole abundance mindset, it shifts everything in the way in which you look at people, the way you look at business, the way you look at competition, the way you look at, and if you're coming from a scarcity mindset, it's almost going to be impossible to fulfill the rest of the generative adaptive practice. For me, it starts with that person. So if we were almost looking from a place to start with, kind of what Ewan's thing was, is getting people to kind of identify where they're at. And that's okay. If there's people that are just scarcity minded people, I get it. That's great. Are they the perfect fit in that organization? I don't know. There's a lot of places that maybe they thrive as a scarcity mindset. But if you're trying to change that thing into a generative practice across your board, I really just believe so strongly that it's got to start with that mindset of that there's enough here for everybody to let's all get to the top of the mountain and celebrate together, not kick each other down on the way up and then stand up there by ourselves going, see, I did it. I'm a self-made person. So anyways.
I know Lizzy has something to say about that. So come on in. You got to get off mute though.
I loved what you just talked about there, Ed, about it really starting with that abundance mindset and how that will affect how people lead. The concept of I've hit the mountain, but where's everybody else? And when you're thinking about corporations, anybody who's trying to hit the mountain by themselves, your corporation won't last, because it is about the people who are making it work. And if we're all thinking in that sense of we can and we do have customers, even if you're in a space where you've lost customers before, because, you know, we can think about COVID where so many businesses are in a very different space. But when you take on that abundant mindset, it's knowing that there are people waiting for our message, people who've been looking for our product. And those are the people that we're going after. So we're going to be the best to serve those people who we know are waiting. And what I love that is where we are right now in business and everything, there's so much more openness to people talking about things like abundant mindset, about, attracting things, manifestations, affirmations. It's now become a thing because what's happened is when there was nothing, as in COVID shut down, the world you knew that you could grab from, when people had to navigate differently, people were able to start navigating through their spirit. And I know that can sound okey-folky before, but that's exactly what it is, right? It's coming from within versus coming from without. And when organizations begin to breathe that way, understanding their within is their message and their tenets and the culture of the company, that's the within. And when they begin to work on that, the without starts to happen. So you've got, okay, here's where I'd like to take my organization. Here's how I'd like for us to be thinking. But how do I make that a reality? Well, what's the within of the organization? When we're looking at this whole framework of GAP, right? Generative Adaptive Practice, what we're going to be able to do is start to allow organizations to build the spirit of their organization. And by doing that, we'll get to the place where we start to have habits. Because if that's the atmosphere that you breathe and that's what you do, you inhale, you exhale, and that's what's happening all the time, this is going to become the norm because it's just the way we be versus the stuff that we do. And this is what this can bring into an organization. Finally give them the ability to create the cultures they've wanted to create with the how to and the what to and the when to, so they can do it. They can finally start to breathe together and become an organism, which is what we teach in our agile practices, right? That's what we're trying to do when we talk about get bigger in scale, is become an organism. But how do you really do that? From the inside. And I think that's what I'm excited about with this framework. It reaches inside and it's not just external.
Man, I am such a lucky man today to have all of these great voices, these great minds, just pouring into this concept and bringing your experience to the forefront. So what else would you like to share about any of these practices? Because I was thinking, we have a major challenge, right, in terms of how we allow generative leadership to support business continuity to run and grow the business, right? I mean, this is a thing. I don't care if your company's super large or super small, you're going to have a foggy top, right? Because there's a lot going on in the world around us. So we have to have, when we talk clarity in the fog of how do we guide our business. So give some insights, around how you would leverage generative leadership to either one of these layers. I don't want to call them levels. I call them layers, right? The top, middle, and bottom. Feel free to jump in. Any one of our panelists. Go ahead, Lena.
Yeah, I was trying to find the actual hand to raise, and as well as my hand to raise. So, as I'm a big fan of open space and anything that's like co-created together as broadly within an organization, within a team, I can't help myself to be like, if we want to add something to that foggy top, and especially when it has to be adaptive, because we don't know, and COVID have taught us that we can't see that far, and we're a lot more humbled now in terms of when we're creating strategy of like, well, who knows, right? So our strategies are shorter, and they also need to be, I mean, I don't know how many are doing 5-10 years plans, like, oh, let's do 2 and 3, right? Like, and then revisit. But a place to also add to that foggy top is making sure that it's not just the top who's having that conversation, that we're inviting, and I was mentioning before in terms of that generative leadership is not just if you're having the title of a certain leadership position, but I think it can be powerful for organization to add in techniques, containers to have those conversations broader out in the organization. Having an open space 1 or 2 day conference or a conversation within an organization that becomes part of the strategy for the organization, or it becomes a place where the top is putting an ear to the ground, like what is our people saying? What is our organization feeling and sensing where the needs are? Like having the strategy reflection happening in all of the organization and not just in the foggy top, and creating space and patterns for that, I think can be extremely powerful. And yes.
So Doc, I threw it in the comments, but just piggybacking on what Lena's saying, right? I'm a big fan of OKRs, and so we get to toss those things out there. We get to align using that. And a lot of things, people look at OKRs, they think, okay, we have to do the top, objective and key results, right? We have to do the top, then the middle, the bottom, but it doesn't have to be done like that, right? We can kind of sync up, and then we get good ideas a lot of times from the bottom, because in most instances, engineers are probably the closest to the product, knowing how it's done and understanding a little bit about the customer. So I'm a big proponent of that, and I think it can help a lot.
Yep, thanks. Let's see if there's any other questions coming from, let me stop sharing, from a Q&A. But, we could just have open discussions, right? I mean, for the last few minutes that we do have before we close the webinar is, what are the thoughts that you have that we could leverage, generative leadership, or where else, besides just the corporate space, right? Because this framework and this practice could be used if I'm running a community organization, right? If I am an NGO, right, for example, and we're providing aid in a specific part of the world, it's beyond just corporate America, right? So what are your thoughts about that? And this is just an open dialogue.
Because I like to dream, and I will forever be a dreamer, I would love for us to start seeing certain government entities taking on this concept. And when I think about America, and I think about how it has its hands in everybody's pot, it would be lovely if when it's putting its hands in, it was offering something like this. You know, letting people know you've existed. You may not have existed the way everybody thinks you should have existed, but there is an existence here. And there is hope here that this country has of survival. So what can we do now to take it from where it is to where it can be? And I think if we could start to take these tenets and apply them to the things, because I'm not saying corporations don't affect people, because we know they do, because that's how people earn their living, that's jobs. But the environment around you is affected, like the country you live in, the way it's governed, the way policies are put out, what the government cares about, what the government doesn't care about, what it thinks about its agenda, what it doesn't think about its agenda. Those things are the things that affect people, you know, everybody who's not working. What if we could start to make changes to that and empower people? So even when I go back and I think about we, right? People are willing to do the hard work in these countries to rebuild. People are willing to get their physical hands dirty. But what could we do as governments to put the skills in people's hands to help them, as I always say, to make that next best move? What could we do? Because it's not, there's money. But what are you going to use the money to do? So if you equip me today to be able to take my hands and do different things with it, I can, you know, we say teach somebody to fish, they can eat for a lifetime. What are we going to do about those things? This is something I think we could be bringing to local councils of different countries and saying, think about this. Maybe it's education you start with, a platform for children everywhere to learn. So no child goes without education, right? Because that's the willingness. Do you want to be educated? Do you want your child educated? Even though your girls have never gone to school before because we didn't believe in sending girls to school, but are you willing to do that? Right, well, yeah, we're willing to send our girls. Okay, well, let's empower you and let's equip you with teachers and let's give you an educational program to equip more teachers and give you spaces to educate. There are things that we can do with this thought process to begin to change the world we live in, because it would just work, right? But like I said, I like to dream.
Yeah, you know, there's a song in there, Lizzy, you know, that you could say, I'm just a dreamer, right?
I'm right there with you, Lizzy, that I was a dreamer. And you were just mentioning education, and that's what I was thinking when we're looking at these. First of all, I love the model being not like a model with shapes, but literally a tree, and that also that yes, there's numbers, but it's all just things that's rooted down. And I don't see this model as like everything has to follow each other. It's more like there is root structures here and they're overlapping, but it's down that soil and that's feeding things up. I do see currently that the next generation, someone who's a little bit younger than us here on this panel, they're asking a different kind of questions in terms of where they want to be hired, what they're willing to sign their life away in terms of the hours that they're spending in their work. And they're asking for a lot of these things to be in place. And I think that could dramatically shift where we are 10 years from now, when that generation, which is the new workforce, are going in and just asking a different set of questions like, well, this is not good enough, or this is not where I'm engaged to want to put in my work hours. And linking that with, let's put more of these kind of methods and techniques into our education system, so that the next generation after also knows how to ask these kind of questions and be in a space where they actually are self-organizing. Because when we have our education system that's just top down, it's a muscle that our younger folks don't know how to, like, if we put them into a place of like, well, then you guys figure out, then they know how to do it. Well, that we need to change, right? Like, how do you self-organize? How can we empower that? How can we let them just you know, like Dave, remember the lab we were in just a month ago of like, oh, let's
Yeah.
just do half of the afternoon of this lab and doing lean coffee. Like let's just have those techniques and have our young people know how to do that, set the agenda themselves, be empowered to hold the conversation and guide them and distill from it. Like, so yes, I'm right there with you. Let's stream along, Lizzy.
You know, and having 4 generations in the workplace, right? The boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, that's going to create a set of challenges. Oh, it has already begun. You see it in the headlines of the millennials and the this and the that. You know, how do we, that's why I say we need to amplify more of generative leadership so that we could harmonize these 4 different generations in this workspace. And it's not just work, but it's also within our community, right? You know, how do we harmonize that so that, you know, we can start working toward a common goal of where we all could thrive, not just some. I want all of us to thrive. You know, that's what I'm all about. So any thoughts?
Dr. Dave, I feel like I'm getting to witness the harmony. So prior to going back to psychology, I actually went to law school and I'm a licensed attorney. And back when I was in law school, if someone told me that I would be doing well-being consultations within big law, I would have told them there is no way. But yet here I am. So it is to being able to dream and talk about that and listening to the generations that are coming forward that are like, yeah, I want a different space to work. And I use that as an example because there's a very stereotypical culture that people even think of when I say big law. But the American Bar Association in 2017 challenged law firms and said, we're going to do different. We're going to do better. We're going to focus on well-being and bringing that in there. And a lot of that has been because of the younger generations wanting, because and we still use the term work-life balance, but it's work-life rhythm. You are only one person. You show up in all these spaces. You are the one person that occupies all these roles. And if you're not well as that person, it doesn't matter what the role. So being able to have, instead of these sharp differences, but looking at how can you be well in all these spaces, because there's just that one you, has been phenomenal. And seeing it happen within spaces that we traditionally would not think that would happen, like in big law or even within the medicine, right? Where long hours, high achievement, all those things are thought to be part of it. But hey, we can still high achieve and do it in a different way. So it's the dreamers and the talking about the dreams that it leads to habits, as Adrian has mentioned. And those intentional habits create this change that we are all talking about today.
Yeah. Go on, Brandon. You're it.
Yeah, I'm struck by that concept of having all of these generations working together in the workplace right now, because it reminds me of this concept that I learned about some years ago from this book, The Wisdom of Crowds. And right in the concept, it underpins so much of what we talk about and coach, and you know, having cross-functional teams and self-organizing teams. It's the same, right? But the idea is that there actually is a lot of strength in having books with different voices, diverse voices, independent voices. And the trick is, how do you aggregate all of that wisdom together? Because when you do harness it, it becomes stronger than, you know, experts in a particular field, because you have it's such a diversity of thought. So I think this is a real opportunity, you know, to figure out those who figure this out. And it goes well beyond just the generational thing. It's a cultural, it's a racial, it's a gender, it's orientations, it's all of those things. If we can figure this out, gosh, it's an amazing kind of thing. And I've seen it happen in different and small aspects, but it's what we all, at least I continue to chase after it.
That's wonderful. So Lizzy, let's go, and then we only have a few more minutes before we close. So want to be respectful of everyone's time. So Lizzy, let's hear it from you. You're like you're going to bring it home, girl.
I mean, I listened to Nicole just talk about, let's forget work-life balance because it's not a real thing. And the reason, it's not a real thing is because it creates judgment, right? Because people define what balance should be, but she talked about it's more like a rhythm. And then I was just listening then to Brandon talking, because I was thinking, as I'm thinking about all these people and I'm thinking about the way we need to live versus the way we have lived and how it's going to morph and when everybody's coming together, what we're talking about is harmony, it's music, right? And one of the things about music is it shifts and it changes genre, but it's still notes, right? But everybody puts the notes together differently, and people then put lyrics to it to tell their story. So really what we're talking about, right, is understanding now that we are going to make music, and the harmonies, to get harmonies right, everybody's got to tune into each other. Because if you have somebody trying to do harmony who doesn't listen to the other singer, it's like, what are you doing? Nobody's trying to hear your voice. We're trying to hear harmony. And harmony is not one person, it's everybody. And that's where the world is forcing, because everybody's saying, well, you don't see me, but you don't see me, but you don't give me a voice. But what everybody's me, I don't see me. So, okay, let's come together now. And this is one of the reasons why when you look on my LinkedIn profile, you see beautiful human. It's not because I think I'm great looking or anything, right? It's because the more and more I kept looking at everybody having to call themselves out and being forced to do this, to be respected, I said, whoa, why can't everybody just be respected for being a beautiful human? Because that's what we are first, that's what we are last, right? We are humans on this planet, and we have got to learn to bring ourselves together. And it's the beauty of, we as Agilists call it collaboration, right? But it's the beauty of everybody coming together. When you think about a tree and you think about roots, it's pulling dirt from lots of different things that have excreted, things that people have thought were messy or dirty or nasty, but it's being able to find in that mess nutrients to grow things that feed people, that shelter people, that give people hope, that clean the atmosphere and the air. That's what we're talking about doing, bringing us together to create a tomorrow that's worth living for every human, every. So no matter where they are, whether they're in work or they're out of work or they're an entrepreneur or they're a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad or somebody who's just looking after children, somebody just wants to be in the sea and spend days fishing or just looking at nature and writing poetry, together it brings music. And music is the one thing that crosses every dimension of language, every culture. Music has no barriers. So let's make music.
That's right. That's right. Talking about dropping the mic, that's how we bring this to a close. So I want to say thank you to all of our attendees who stuck around and listen to the wonderful insights of our panelists, and just say thank you to our panelists for stepping in, to come, not only just for today, but for all of you who have been harassing, hey, come on my podcast, let me interview you. I thank you so much for sharing, so much insights of yourself and putting this back out into the world in terms of being generative, because the word itself means to give life, rebirth, right? To create something new. And that's the goal of generative leadership and generative adaptive practice. So just a few more things before we go. It's like, we're launching a cohort in February, and cohorts they're long running. It's going to be maybe about 4 to 8 weeks. I have a super early bird code that I'll share out for everyone who attends. And it's a place for us to come and learn together and grow together and learn how to implement the generative adaptive practices, the gap, right, of abundance mindset all the way to fun and joy, of how do we really do that in real terms. So a lot of the things that we discussed here, some of these practices will be part of that cohort. And I hope that you are open to attending that and checking that out, and share it with others. This video also, since this is recorded, this will be shared back to the ether, and shared out to the world that we had this conversation today. So with that, thank you for being here. And any final things? I give someone like 30 seconds to give us a final, like, psh. Yeah. All righty. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dave.
Thanks,
Thank
Doc.
you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Nice to see everybody. Take care.
Yeah, lovely to do this together. Thank you for your time. Thanks for getting us together, Dave.
Yes, it
Welcome.
was great.